Welcome to Forbidden Planet Television. This is FPTV new releases, and this is a strand we're doing especially for October. This is 12 Days of Halloween. I'm joined by Laura Dodd, the head book buyer for Forbidden Planet, and the mighty Christina Henry, the author of Ghost Tree. And you're here to tell us all about that book and some other stuff besides. How are you doing, Christina?
Very well.
Excellent. Just off camera a second ago, we were having a conversation about how dreadful things are in the world right now. So I like the fact that you could answer. I realise I queued that up completely incorrectly. How are you? And it's you where you just wrench from going, oh my God, things are terrible, to like, hey, I'm okay. Let's talk about books. It's very nice to see you. Thanks for joining us.
Oh yeah, this is great. I'm really excited.
Yeah, awesome. So, Laura, I know you have a ton of questions, so I'll let you get the ball rolling.
Yes, yeah. So, what can you tell us about your latest novel, Ghost Tree?
So Ghost Tree is a coming-of-age horror novel about a Midwestern town where bad things happen.
Yes. And
it's always in the Midwest as well. I'm a huge Resident Evil fan, and that's obviously Raccoon City is in the Midwest, so all the bad stuff happens like Midwest.
I think some of that perhaps is to do with the fact that if you spend any time in the Midwest, which I have done, it's actually can be quite spectacularly lonely and isolatory when night falls, and because of the vast expanses of land, it seems to me that I've had that experience where my subconscious is just working overtime about what's out there. I can just see this void through the window, but I know it's I'm in the middle of nowhere.
So we also have a large number of spooky cornfields and soybean fields,
right. So can you give us any, that's an awesome tagline, can you give us any of a bit more of a flavour of how the novel opens and where it's going, without any spoilers?
Yeah, it's always such a challenge because you don't want to spoil anything, and I feel like for people who haven't read the book, this is the kind of book that the less you know about it, the better.
Okay.
But it's about... it's a multiple point of view novel. There's the book opens, there are two girls found dead. And so one of the things that's happening in the book is that obviously there's an investigation. So there's like some stuff from the point of view of the police officer. There's some point of view of the mayor of the town who has a completely different agenda than everyone else. But the primary story in Ghost Tree is this friendship between Lauren and Miranda. And there are two girls who are, one of them is 14, about to become 15. The other one's already is a little bit older. And their relationship they've had since they were children. And they're at that point in girls' friendships where they start to change, and one of them wants to be an adult much more than the other. And I think this was something that I really wanted to explore, this idea that you have these friendships since you were young, and that sometimes that friendship's not going to make it to adulthood. Sometimes you guys are just changing too much. And it's really was important for me to write about this because so many coming of age horror novels are about boys, and they're about boys' friendships, and then they're treated like these sacred cows, like, oh, those friends that I had when I was 12, and nothing would ever be better than that. And I just don't think that that's true to life necessarily with boys or girls. Yeah. You know what I mean? Because you grow and you change. But that was one of the things I really wanted to get at in this book, was to write a story about girls and girls' emotions and girls' relationships at that point in their lives. But it's not a young adult novel. It's for adults.
Yeah. Okay, that's very interesting. So it's a kind of a Dear Staff antidote, if you will, to to the whole Stand By Me genre, which has kind of flooded popular culture and the popular memory. So that I think you're really onto something, because I think, you know, so effective is that movie, particularly in manipulating people's emotions. A whole generation of people have walked out going, shit, yeah, you never really do have friends like you do when you're 10 years old. Who does, you know? But in fact, that's not true. You know, you have great friends at college, you have great friends at work. And also that what I think is great about what you've done is that province of memory of that era in your life. It's not just a male domain, and there's so many stories about, you know, young men at that period of time in their lives. You know, it's really refreshing, I think, interesting to be, you know, to be resetting that balance to a degree.
Well, it can be very frustrating as a female author, like where, first of all, you know, there's sort of a predominance of boys' stories especially in horror, but also there's this idea that men's experience is universal and that women's experience is specific. And you know, it's like, well, of course a woman would read a book about boys, but, you know, a man wouldn't read a book about girls, you know. And I think that I'd like to move the needle a little bit on that idea.
Yeah, I think that's great. I mean, I remember once I had the mumps when I was at school, and I read all of my sister's Enid Blyton, Mallory Townsend, St. Clair's books, right? So I've read all of those, which back then, when I was a little kid, you know, in the 70s, was considered to be highly unusual. So when I went back into school and I told everybody about this, I was like kind of a laughing stock, you know, among both my like male and female friends. You know, I know, but those books are actually awesome and they're horribly dated now. But you know, it's just the fact that I'd read this whole kind of female-driven, female-orientated fiction series, and it's funny how embedded those attitudes are. And I think even now, I think it's very important to take the tack that you are and explore the things that you're looking at.
Yeah, and I'm always kind of looking for that way to connect with all readers, not just female readers.
Yeah, no, of course, and I think that's fascinating. The book's set in the 80s, isn't it? Have I got that right, Christina? Yeah. So, what's your emotional connection to that decade, and how do you feel about it?
Yeah, so I mean, that was really, in a lot of ways, that was sort of an homage actually to Stephen King and like Ray Bradbury, who wrote about the eras in which they grew up, right? Stephen King has mythologized the 50s in his books. And I grew up in the 80s. You know, I was a child of the 80s. I was born in 1974. So that was really the decade in which I was a child, like a conscious child. So it was just, to a certain extent, wanting to write a story that was set in the era of my childhood. And also, I have to be honest, I find sometimes writing in the modern era very frustrating because everyone has cell phones and it's just so easy to say, well, why don't they just call somebody?
So true.
But also because I love like horror movies from the 80s, and it was just a way to kind of get that flavor of things that I love into a book.
Yeah. Do you have any particular favorites, by the way, of when it comes to 80s horror flicks?
Yeah, I mean, how long do you have?
I'm here for this conversation.
For this topic, we've got an infinite amount of
time. So I'm a massive John Carpenter fan. My favorite is The Thing. Yeah.
Of course.
And
such a great film.
It's perfect, isn't it?
It really is. But again, it's very, very male.
Yes, it is. It's a very male story, but you could just as easily, you could have mixed genders, you could have all women. You know, I think it would be just as interesting. But it's a great movie because it really it captures sort of that feeling of helplessness you have when you're isolated. You know. Yeah. So that's probably like my number one favorite. And I would say after that, trying to narrow it down here. Like I said, I could be here for a while. I just love. I think one of the things I like too about horror films from the 80s, is there's almost a kind of innocence to them, isn't there?
I think so. Yeah. No, I think so. I mean, when you watch, say, The Lost Boys, for example,
right.
there's a real simplicity at the heart of that film. And while it's and there's so many things about it. It's such a teenage fantasy in so many respects, and it's not particularly frightening either. It's not really a horror movie per se, but and it's almost like a fairy tale, I guess, with the way I look at it.
Yeah, and that's one of the things. Like, if you think about a lot of early horror films, like people, we call them slasher movies, right? And they're not even really gory. Like, even a film like Texas Chainsaw Massacre, there's hardly any blood in it. But it's so off-putting because the situation is so bizarre, and everything just makes you uneasy. And in the film, I don't know when the last time you guys saw Texas Chainsaw Massacre, if it's something you watch on the regular, but in the film, has one of the best introductions of the killer, because Leatherface just appears, grabs this guy off the porch, and disappears. That's it, And
you actually don't know what the hell's going on. It's completely discombobulating. It's so true. I was thinking about what you're saying, because another great film, I think, from the era, it's not really an 80s film, but it kind of qualifies, would be Halloween, which again is kind of it's almost completely bloodless, but it's about that tremendous feeling of unease that you have, and Carpenter does that so well. And I guess I think another interesting one is Alien, simply because honestly, over the years, I think Alien's a masterpiece, right? I'm not particularly a fan of the other Alien films, but the original. But the thing to this day that I get nightmares about from Alien is the opening crawl down the corridor in the Nostromo. I've always found that terrifying. Not the bits where the alien's on the loose and people are getting picked out. There's something about the oppressive nature of that spacecraft before they even encounter the xenomorph, which is kind of terrifying. And I think that's the genius of that.
Yeah, there's a little bit of claustrophobia, even though it was a really big ship, right?
Yes, right.
But it just feels tight. It feels like there's nowhere for you to go.
So absolutely right.
The face huggers, I think I was too young to watch that film. I've got an older brother, and he was having a sleepover. I went downstairs to watch Alien with them, and then I remember going to sleep like that with my hand over my chest. So I think I slept like that for a good few years.
Sleepovers are a key point of trauma if you're an American girl, because that's where you watched all the horror movies. Everyone always had an older sibling, who would go to the video store back when such things existed and rent rated R movies that we weren't allowed to watch. And then we would all sit in a room and scream, and terrorize their parents, I'm sure.
Plus, there's if you played Alien Isolation, there's a DLC for it where it's the last part of the film, and you can be Ellen Ripley, and you have to try and get the alien out to the airlock and stuff. And it's the most frightening 20 minutes of gameplay ever. Because you remember how you felt when you first watched it, and you're just like, oh God, there's only so much oxygen, and you're just like, oh, it's a lot.
Yeah, that's amazing. Laura, I know you had some, I remember we were talking before about Christina's back catalogue.
Mm-hmm. Yes. So with the Ghost Tree, it's a bit different from your previous works like Alice or Lost Boy, which were kind of reimaginings of existing stories. How was the kind of process different this time round for Ghost Tree?
I mean, I don't think of the process is never different, first of all, because I always write the same way, which is whatever I'm going to write, one thing sort of occurs to me, like either a line or an image or something, and then I write chronologically, I write by hand. And so I just start writing so I can see what it is, basically. So I like to discover the story the way a reader does, not as a writer. And a lot of times I'll be surprised by things that come out in the story. I hate to plan. I hate to
Yeah,
outline.
okay.
Even if I'm asked for a synopsis, I just get angry because I don't have one.
Yeah. Hence the fact, yeah, even when you've written the book and you were asking you to talk about it, it's like,
yeah. Because for me, it's much more interesting just to find the story. And if I wrote an outline, there'd be no interest to me to write it, because it's like, oh, well, I outlined it. Now I know it's going to happen. And there's, oh, well, I don't want to write this now. So I just like to, I'm just kind of lazy writer, to be honest with you. I just want to like write the story and find out what happened. And then when I'm done, I'm like, okay, that's it. I'm done with this story now. I don't want to look at it again. But I don't think of like something like Alice or Ghost Tree as different to me, because Alice is my story.
Yeah.
Whatever I write, it belongs to me. It doesn't matter if the source is more obvious than another book. It's still my story. So and the thing is that when you're writing, you're always retelling other stories, because that's what writers do. We take everything we've read, everything we've heard, everything we've seen, and it just like gets mashed up in our brains, and then we tell it our own way. And this is something I've said before, is that a lot of times writers are just sort of playing like a game of telephone with all the storytellers that have come before them. And when you play telephone, right, you have a line of kids, like say 6 kids, and one kid says, one thing at the beginning, ham and cheese, and when you get to the last kid, it's become something completely different, because it's morphed in the telling. And that's what storytelling is. And when I write a story like The Ghost Tree, I don't think of it as more or less original than Alice, because it's mine. It belongs to me. Alice belongs to me. Lost Boy belongs to me. Whatever their source material, that was just an inspiration. Now it's my story.
That's very interesting, and that's really morphed nicely into another thing that we were going to ask you about, which is about your process. So do you never synopsize at all? Is it how you just start on page 1? And
yeah, I just start writing, because
that must feel very free.
It is. It's a lot like riding a roller coaster that's gone off the tracks, and you're just flying and hoping that you land somewhere and don't crash. But I also just love that process of discovery. When I started writing Girl in Red, all I saw for that book was red. I just saw her in my head. Like, she was wearing a red hoodie and she was holding an axe, and I was like, who's that? Let me write a book and find out who she is, because I didn't know. And then I just don't really think about the story in a conscious way. I just sort of let it simmer on the back burner, and then when I sit down to write, things just sort of come forward, which is like nice, and I think it makes writing easier, but that's me. Yeah.
It's so fascinating to me, and I know when Laura and I speak to different authors, how different everybody's process is, and how some people plan and endlessly rewrite and whatnot. But it would seem to me that were I an author, which I'm not, that your process is something tremendously exciting about that, because you're going on a journey, as you put the words on the page. And
I think most writers sound like real writers, and I don't. I mean, I've been on a lot of panels, and people are always like, well, I have this pre-draft, and then I do this, and then, I outline, and I have, index cards, and I have Post-its, and things that show me where the turning points are. And I'm like, oh, that sounds like a lot of work, man.
Right on. I wholeheartedly endorse that viewpoint. Christina, what can you tell us about, and I'm conscious now that the answer may be nothing, given the other things we've talked about. What can you tell us about Near the Bone, which is due out next year?
Yeah. Let me see if I can.
Is the answer going to be, it's my new book, you should go and buy it?
Yeah. It's about a man and a woman who live on an isolated mountaintop, and there's something in the woods. I'm very fond of something in the woods, and it's a theme. And also there are strangers who have come to the mountain who are going to change everything. So I think that's probably as much as I can. I just like people to discover the book. I don't like those movie trailers that give away the whole movie.
And I think you're absolutely right, particularly with horror movies. I think you're much better off, say, for example, going to see Get Out without having any idea what it's about, than walking in and somebody's giving you a synopsis that takes you in one direction or another. That's a great example of a film that you should see completely cold. And I think the best horror novels absolutely work that way as well. So I totally respect what you're saying. It makes a lot of sense to me.
I'm always fighting with my editors when we're writing the back cover copy. I'm like, no, that gives away something. Cross it out.
Hey, so Christina, we're moving towards the end of our time together. Laura, do you have one more question before we go?
I do. So I'm going to be asking all the authors this for the Halloween interviews. What scares you?
Besides the obvious.
Yeah. Obviously, we all know Donald Trump is everybody's first answer. So, outside of that.
Right. So it's like fascism, a pandemic. Let me get down to probably what scares me. Geez, for real, not Freddy Krueger, who I was scared of when I was a kid. I think just dying and feeling like I've left things undone. I think that scares me. Yeah. I definitely would like to have a long life where I get to the end and feel like I've done everything I wanted to do. Yeah. I don't want to regret things.
I think that's a very interesting and quite chilling answer, actually. And I could see how, particularly given the fact that you're super creative, how that would hang over your head. An unfinished life, that would be in that moment where you knew you were rolling out before you got to do X, Y, and Z that was in your head. That would be a terrible moment for sure.
Yeah, to me that sounds terrifying.
Yeah. Hey, Christina, thanks so much for joining us. So this has been FPTV 12 Days of Halloween. And we've been privileged to talk to Christina Henry about her new book, Ghost Tree, or maybe not about her new book, Ghost Tree, but about everything around her new book, Ghost Tree, which you can. I know it's not a new book, we've had it for a while, but you can link to purchase from the links here in the video. And thanks so much for joining us, mate. It's been great chatting to you.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, you take care. We'll see you soon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.